بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أشرف الخلق والمرسلين. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the pleasure to be with you today. My name is Mohammed Abdel Mati. I'm an environmental expert in the Ministry of Environment. Dr. Nawal Al-Sanna, she's an expert in Kahrama. We will be co-chairing this session. This session is about the water and health and environment issues. Our Dr. Nawal, do you want to introduce our first speaker?
Yes, we would like to welcome our first keynote speaker, Dr. Adel Al-Jayousi. Dr. Adel Al-Jayousi is the Vice President of the Royal Scientific Center in Jordan since 2011. He worked as a Regional Director for the Conservation of Nature during the period 2004 to 2011. He was a university professor and academic director for the MBA program in the United Kingdom during the period 1993 to 2004. He is an expert and consultant for many international organizations such as the EU, ESCWA, and the World Bank. And he has over than 30 articles published in the domain of water policy, sustainable development, and knowledge management, and also he's founding member in Jordan Green Building Council, Fair Trade, and Green Fund for Environment. His presentation will be about water and environment in the GCC, rethinking water discourse and new imperative. Please, Dr. Jayousi, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I'll be combining my talk in Arabic and English for the sake of lack of translation. Perhaps the last 2 days we've heard a lot about the challenges between water, energy, and environment. Little can be done. So my presentation in the last day will be more of reflections on the way forward and new imperatives. What needs to be done to transform the current situation into what we call a knowledge economy. I'll be addressing these simple components: the state, what's happening now, the pressure, the impact, and the response, what needs to be done. And in the last slide, I'll be talking about Rio +20. What will be the Arab or GCC discourse? What will be the GCC and Arab story for Rio +20? Let's have just a global perspective on the key challenges that we are faced. We cannot separate the global challenges from any regional context. So GCC is part of a global story, and we need to understand the people values. The governance is a key issue because water, energy, environment, at the core, it's about governance in terms of environmental justice, in terms of how we allocate resources between the rich and the poor, and how do we agree on our regional commons. At the end of the day, also we are talking about an environment in terms of financial climate that is also challenging to our development objectives. And besides, we need to talk about our natural capital. In many cases, we are faced with what we call ecological amnesia, or what we call a lot of blind spots. Our economic model, our economic development suffers from blind spots. We are challenged that our economy nowadays does not tell us the ecological truth in terms of GNP, since the GNP does not reflect the real health and wealth of nations. So there is a disconnect between what the economy is telling us and the impact on our natural capital in terms of marine, water, air, etc. But at the end of the day, we talk about security in a global context. We talk about food crisis, environmental crisis. There is also the issue of security in a nutshell. Very simple. At the global scene, we can see that our natural capital is declining and our ecological footprint, our impact is taking an increased rate. Now, some authors talk about what we call great acceleration in terms of water, food, the number of infrastructure, even the number of McDonald's. So basically, a consumption culture is being the characterization of our culture, which has a huge impact on our ecosystems and on our natural capital. So we need to be aware of this type of great acceleration and the overuse, exploitation of resources that will have a huge impact on our ecosystems and natural capital. Also now there's an institute called the Peak Oil Institute, where they are arguing that we are reaching what we call a peak oil era, that the oil will not last forever, and we need to transform to a new green economy, that we need to be aware of how we are able to harness the renewable energy in order to be relevant, in order to be able to transform and to be part of the 21st century. At the end of the day, very simple, the idea of development for the sake of development, or I should rephrase my statement, the idea of growth for the sake of growth is a recipe for destruction. So we need to redefine what do we mean by growth and what do we mean by development. So a distinction needs to be made between development and growth. So cancer, by its nature, it's growth, but it's unfavorable growth. So we need to define what do we mean by growth and what are the limits of growth, and we need to ensure that we are having development rather than growth. At the end of the day, between the rich and the poor, the north and the south, east and the west, we need also to talk about environmental justice, who gets what and why. And in terms of ecological space within the region, within GCC and beyond GCC, we need to talk about environmental justice, equity, and governance, and we cannot be confined to what we call just a closed club. We need to think of what the EU has been doing in the last 50 years after the Second World War, where they established a community for coal and steel on what we call regional commons. How can the Arab region establish a community for water and energy or sustainable future? So we need to think of the global commons, the regional commons, and how we can work together for a better future for all. This is from Dr. Al-Zubari, a presentation basically, where he had a nice trend analysis of that the per capita availability of water is declining, the population is increasing, and many GCC countries are under poverty line. In terms of areas under irrigation, again, the trend is increasing. So basically, we are overusing our natural capital. And however, we are transforming energy into water. We are investing in renewable energy or energy in order to produce water. But however, the impact for this, that the cost of per cubic meter due to the brine will have impact on the cost of water in the future. So we need to be aware of what we call externalities or the spillover effect at the end of the day. Again, here the per capita water consumption is increasing in many countries. What's the pressure? In terms of ecological footprints, the global average is about 1.8 hectare per person at the global level. If we look at GCC countries, the ecological footprints, as you can see here, is way above the global average, which tells us about what we call our stewardship, environmental stewardship or guardianship for the earth. The notion of a human in the Arabic culture is what we call a trustee, khalifa, mustakhlaf. The idea of a trustee, a steward, is not about consumption. It's about being a trustee on earth so as to make sure that there is a balanced use of resources. So we need to be aware of our role as humans, not as consumers. At the end of the day, there is a cost for environmental degradation. This is a UNDP study or METAP study in the last 5 years where they calculated that there is a cost for environmental degradation which amounts to about 2 to 5% of GNP. So it's a huge impact on the GNP. So we need to transfer the value of our ecosystem services into GNP, which tells us it's a huge impact. For some countries, it's hundreds of millions of dollars per year. In terms of the world, the global marine transfer, we use water as means for transport. The amount of these numbers are in millions of tons per year. So in the last, we can see the amount of traffic, the amount of cargo that is crossing the ocean, and the environmental impact of this transport and on water pollution. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that we respect the communities of life around us, not only humans, but also the species around us, because they provide us with food, with energy, and they are and medicinal plants. In the last few years, it was the use of medicinal plants was amounted for more than 140 billion per year in the US. So we need to be aware that there is a lot of ecosystem services around us, from medicinal plants to food to water to energy from sea. And at the end of the day, we are disturbing the communities of life around us, from fisheries, from marine ecosystems, etc. The response, in this presentation, I will talk about very quickly about 10 imperatives, or in terms of the global economy. I'll talk about a New Deal, about a green economy, and what do we mean by a new community for water and energy, as similar to the EU community of coal and steel. And we need to define the regional commons, what we call in Arabic الناس شركاء في ثلاث الماء والكلأ والنار حديث الرسول عليه السلام. So we need in the GCC to think beyond GCC and to redefine our regional commons in terms of shared or common poor resources or public goods. What constitutes public goods? The 10 imperatives, the one that I talked about, in the market economy, capitalism does not tell us the ecological truth, since GNP has blind spots and we suffer from ecological amnesia. So we need to talk about, to think beyond GNP and to have new metrics to measure progress and the health and wealth of nations. And also to make a distinction, as I talked about, between growth and development. If you can see here, the sustainability index in this part of the world, in the Arab region and GCC, is either very low or we have no information. So it's pretty challenging if we act with limited amount of information, where we're not part of the mapping of the global scene, or whether we are at the lower part of the spectrum. The second imperative is about redefining sustainable development, what I call in Arabic, in terms of localizing the terminology. Sustainability to me is about time mainly, but it's not about quality. So I refer to it as tayyiba development, how we can embed the local culture as part of sustainability. Sustainability is a Western terminology, but we need to embed our local notions and local culture of sustainability, which I refer to tayyiba development, which includes a harmony between all four capitals: the natural capital, our ecosystems, the social capital, our culture, the technology, and the economics. So we need there need to be a balance between all four capitals. And each model used by the EU or the region depicts a new notion of development. Here, in these circles on the right, we argue that environment underpins our social and financial capital. So if we destroy our natural capital, that means we are destroying our economy. The imperative of R&D and STI, science, technology, and innovation. I think Dr. Walid mentioned rightly in the last 2 days, Walid Zubari, very interesting idea of how to localize and root technology in this part of the world, and this is a key. And when we look at the regional landscape, we have Kisr, KAUST, KAXT, Qatar Foundation, Masdar, etc. There is a new emerging initiatives, very promising initiatives in the GCC and in the region that need to be harnessed, what I call virtual research groups, or by collaborative research alliances. What's needed is to create a critical mass of the human capital, of the intellectual capital, that will be able to have a tipping point. So this is very crucial in terms of producing a new culture of research in this part of the world. And this is part of learning from ecology. How can we use biomimicry to transform the linear model into a circular model where we learn from culture? There is no waste in nature, and waste is a new resource waiting to be harnessed. And this is a lesson to be learned from nature. And the argument is that our economic model today has been mainly informed by economics. Our development model has been informed by economics, but it has not been transformed by culture and ecology. So we need to make sure that our development model mimics ecology and being reformed and informed by culture and ecology. In terms of the imperative number 4 is about investment in green economy. If we talk about the Gulf, the cost of war, there is an interesting study last year by Force Society Group in India, which talks about 12 trillion of dollars, the cost of war in the Middle East. And there's a lot of foregone opportunities. If this money has been spent not on security, military expenditure, we have this part of the world will be different. So we need to make sure that how we invest our in green economy in terms of science, technology, and innovation. The fifth imperative is about valuing ecosystems, which is about devising new metrics for measuring progress of societies and fostering progress of societies through our natural capital in terms of having biological treatment plants, having solutions inspired from nature. And this is very basic from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Why? Because basically nature provides us with nutrition, health, water supply, disaster management, and green jobs. Imperative number 6 is about the region as a unit of analysis. In many cases, we need to look at the region, whether it's GCC or beyond GCC. How can we use this region as a unit of analysis to look at the regional interdependencies between the region? I was in Riyadh 2 years ago in the Global Competitiveness Forum, where Michael Porter from Harvard was arguing that in order for Saudi Arabia and GCC to compete, to be like Northern Europe, we need to rethink of the boundaries of GCC to include Iraq, Yemen, and Jordan. So we need to be aware of the regional imperatives in terms of water, energy, and food nexus, and to make sure how we have the comparative advantage, the economies of scale, and the competitive advantage by including the rich and the poor. Again, regional commons, how we can agree on the regional commons, which are basically, I would argue, it's about mainly water, energy, and environment. Climate change response. Now, people were arguing that, well, we are not part of the debate about climate change. Our contribution is very minimal in the Arab world, and in many cases, we are not part of the global story or the global debate on climate change. What's needed is to harness opportunities of climate change through CDM, and now there are some new opportunities in Qatar and Emirates, United Arab Emirates, and anyway, all the prices need to consider also the external cost of climate change as well. In terms of impact of climate change, it was reported that even Bahrain may lose about 15-kilometer coastline due to climate change. So we need to be aware of the impact of climate change at the end of the day. Imperative number 4 is culture and local knowledge, indigenous knowledge or traditional knowledge. If we now want to talk about sustainability in the region, we need to define what constitutes a good life. ما الذي يشكل حياة طيبة? And حياة طيبة, basically, a good life, it's about making sure that there is harmony between man and nature, harmony between economy and ecology, and harmony between people and their surroundings. Also, this role of environmental stewardship. Sustainability is about having the role of steward and what we call عمارة الأرض, عمارة الكون, عمارة الأرض, the construction of earth. Losing our sight of our role as trustees is the basic cause of destruction of our ecosystems. And at the end of the day, our consumption patterns and lifestyles, we need to promote the notion of living lightly on earth, which we call zuhd, which is basically to consume within your limits and not to abuse or overuse, because this is part of trusteeship or stewardship. Number 9 is the energy imperative. I think our colleagues talked beautifully about this, but here I will elaborate on what we call demand-led innovation. Demand-led innovation is basically about investing in a green building and energy saving, and even just a green building, which is now being on the way in the Gulf countries, especially in Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. The saving is immense. It's about 40% of energy use. So we need to invest definitely in research in green technology and green building. At the end of the day, the world, as Thomas Friedman talks, the world is not just flat, it's hot and crowded. And if total energy is conserved, why are we worried about energy shortage? It's about allocation of resources, because we talk about conservation of mass and conservation of energy. It's about people attitudes, people worldviews, people mindsets, and people consumption patterns that destroy the capital, the human capital, or the social, or the natural capital. Finally, number 9 is the food imperative. Again, our people have talked in the last 2 days. The speakers talked eloquently about the food water nexus. I will not elaborate on that, but we talk about the policy options, strategic options. Shall we move water to people or people to water? Or shall we move food to people or people to food? At the end of the day, again, it's about how we think of the region as a unit of analysis and how to go in a globalized economy. The logical unit of analysis in a globalized world is a region that will create a critical mass for innovation and for security in a broader sense. The key message, what will be our story for Rio Plus 20? In many global events, this part of the world, the Arab world and GCC, we need to agree on a common word, on a story, what will be our new deal for Rio Plus 20. And I believe we can bring a lot of revival of our culture, like what we call community-based protected areas, like the HEMA system. We can talk about the intellectual property of the local, how we can make sure that the trade and environment agreements protects our intellectual property, and how we can be part of contributing to a new deal in Rio Plus 20, and a new sustainability based on our culture and our values. People-centered development, what I call the Tayyiba development. What do we mean by sustainability? And we need to redefine and contribute to the global community what sustainability means in a global context. In many cases, we stay in a defensive manner because we are trying to defend our consumption patterns, but we are not trying to communicate that we can inform and contribute to a global discourse in sustainability by trying to reviving our local knowledge. The well-being of society, we need also to contribute in Rio. What do we mean by new consumption patterns based on our notion of zuhd? And finally, the ecological restoration. We need to engage with civil society, with private sector, to make sure that there is innovation and a new discourse during the Arab Spring. It will be no more top-bottom approach of water governance or environmental governance. It's about bottom-up approaches, and we need to be careful to our water users and to listen to our stakeholders in order to have a new ecological restoration and a new story for this part of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jayousi, for your very informative and interesting presentation. And Dr. Rana.
Yeah, I have the pleasure now to invite Dr. Hamid Bakir. Dr. Hamid Bakir is the Regional Advisor on Water, Sanitation and Health, and the Regional Focal Point for Climate Change and Health. Doctor, can you take this? Excuse me. Can I take this? It's yours. In WHO Regional Office for the Eastern Mediterranean Center for Environmental Health Activities. Dr. Bakir is a distinguished figure in the field of environmental health, water management, climate change, and wastewater reuse, in addition to health impact assessment. Dr. Hamid, the floor is yours. Okay, no problem. Mr. Laban also. Mr. Laban, could you please provide your presentation also? We have time for this session because we have 2 no-shows at the end of the session, so at least we have some more time for maybe discussion. And
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Noel, for the help with the presentation. This presentation is really more focused on water safety and water quality rather than the general aspect of water management. We were planning to actually convene an entire workshop on water safety management at this conference, but unfortunately, it did not work out. We wanted to give an entire session on water safety management, but unfortunately, it did not work out. Some of the speakers couldn't make it, so we had to just focus on the introduction of WHO guidelines on water safety management and the main features of the guidelines. So that's what I'll be doing. WHO guidelines we started issuing them as back as 1958. We were talking about the international standards on water safety at that time, water quality. And then we departed from the international standards to the guidelines concept, which are recommendations, evidence-based recommendations on water safety and water quality. They provide an international reference point on scientific reference point on water quality and safety. And the guidelines are advisory in nature. They are not compulsory. Countries don't have to abide by them, but they can use them as a source of advice on how to go about setting up national standards and how to go about managing water safety. The last edition of the guidelines, the 4th edition, was issued in 2011. The most recent one supersedes the earlier versions of the guidelines. The purpose of WHO guidelines on drinking water quality is basically to protect public health from hazards that may exist or arise from water supplies. This is the entire objective, protecting public health. And it's a reminder to us that when we provide water supply services, we are providing them for convenience and for satisfaction, all of that, but the original objective and the main objective remains public health protection. And the guidelines, in doing so, they provide countries with references on the constituents of water. What should be the concentration of nitrate or nitrites or chlorine or chloride, et cetera, the maximum that is allowable from health point of view. But not only that, but they also provide recommendations on how safety can be managed. And this is the new element of the guidelines. This is what came about in 2006 version, the 3rd edition, and ascertained in the 4th edition of the guidelines. Earlier, we used to recommend the values. What are the specifications of water to be safe? But now it's also how to manage water safety, not only just the specifications. The guidelines, there are a few things that remain very, very sort of primary and in a principal way important. That microbial water quality remains the most important public health concern when it comes to water safety. Chemicals, et cetera, are all secondary when it comes to public health protection from risks that arise in water supplies. Control of microbial risk factors in water should never be compromised at any time and for any reason. Should never. And that's where you have multiple barriers. You don't just rely on one barrier. You have multiple barriers. If this door fails, the next door stops it. If that fails, the next barrier stops it. And this is where the preventative framework for water safety management was introduced. And this is what I'm going to focus about, the preventative framework for water safety management. The guidelines say that if you want to ensure that your water is safe in a reliable manner so that you can go to your home and sleep the night without worrying about water safety, the only way to do it is to act in a preventative way rather than reactive way. And this is where the concept of water safety plan comes in. So again, just to say, I mean, in 2006, the third edition of WHO guideline first introduced the preventative framework for water safety management, the water safety plans. In 2011, the guidelines confirmed that this is the most effective way of securing water safety. So what is the framework for water safety management? According to the guidelines, the framework for water safety management combines three elements. The first one is a health-based target that can be translated into different forms. But a target for water safety, that would say water must be safe this way or that way. We will talk about this in a minute. But this must be derived from health benefits. And then you have a management system that will ensure that the target is met. So you set your target, and then you have your management system that will ensure water safety. And this management system is about having an adequate and properly managed water supply scheme or system. And best way to achieve that is to have a water safety plan developed and implemented for each water supply scheme. And then the third element, a crucial element, is to have an independent water surveillance scheme, verification of water safety. So you have the three components, the target, the management system, and the independent surveillance of water safety. To take them one at a time and just shed some light on each of those elements. The targets, the health-based targets, you can set them in many different forms. You can set them as specification of water safety. Most of our region, we have standards for water safety. These standards for water safety are based on targets, health-based targets. They are most of the time based on WHO guideline values, and the guideline values are derived from a health target, which is basically 1 in a million people, 1 in a million healthy life years lost because of risk in water supply. Now, somebody will tell me why should we allow that, but it's a big argument. But it's basically we allow what we call tolerable health risk is like 1 in a million healthy life years might be lost because of risks in drinking water supplies. And because of that, and based on that, we derive the recommendations on water specifications that would achieve that, will not allow more loss of healthy life than the 1 in a million. You can also set the guidelines or your standards and your targets also as health targets. You can say, we don't want more than 1 in 100,000, 1 in 10,000 incidents of diarrhea in the country. And that is because diarrhea is an outcome of water supply, risk factors in water supply. So you can say 1 in 10,000, the prevalence rate of diseases. But more common, what do people do? They express their guidelines or their standards or their targets in operational form. Basically, they can say, like we want every water supply system in the country to be pipe water supply, for example. Or we want to use certain technology in delivering safe water, et cetera, et cetera. Very common to have those kind of things. If we move to the second element, which is the water safety management system, and that's where you have an adequate and properly managed water supply. And what we say in the recommendations of the guidelines is that water safety plans are the key. And I want to highlight here, when we say water safety plans, it's really not a plan. It's basically water safety management framework that is the key, the preventative management framework. This is a system where you assess the risks in water. You walk your system as if you were a drop of water. You walk it from the source all the way to the consumer. And you assess all the way what are the risks that can arise, what are they, how big are they, and where do they enter your supply system. And then you assess how you want to control those risk factors, how to stop them from entering your water supply system. And then once you assess the control measures of how to stop them entering your water supply system or control them, then you want to have a system of monitoring that your control measures are effective. When you say, I want to stop entry of pollutants into my surface water, and you put a boundary around your pond, you want to make sure that boundary actually stops animals coming into your water, your pond or whatever. So you want to start, actually make sure that your system of monitoring can ensure effective measures. And also, your monitoring system also has to measure the effectiveness of your safety. I mean, basically to verify the end product of water and to verify that your control measures are implemented, not just effective, but are implemented. Now, the framework for water safety management, it's a risk management approach. It's typical risk management approach, assess risk, control measures, and monitor. But it adds on top of all of that a clear definition of responsibilities. Who's responsible for what? As you can see from the 3 boxes on the left, the health-based targets are the responsibility of the regulators. The adequately managed water supply system is the responsibility of the utilities. They are entirely responsible according to legislation and laws to do safe water supplies. The system of surveillance that will follow is the responsibility of the health sector, the public health agencies. It's a public health function, and it's the responsibility of public health agencies. As you can see, if you want to ensure water safety, we have to clearly define our complementary roles, not conflicting roles, but complementary roles that actually, at the end of the day, provide us with safe water to all. The system of surveillance, it can measure, verify the water safety, the quality of the water. When you have a glass of water and you want to drink it, you can verify its safety. But under the preventative management framework, the surveillance function goes beyond that. It goes to assess and audit that your control measures are actually functioning. So it's actually process audit. It becomes a process audit, not just only water in the quality measurement. And in a way, as you know, in the current and typical way of managing water safety, what we do, we have a water supply system. We have a problem. Somebody complains about it. And then we go take measurement of water, and we take sample and take it to the laboratory, and then we confirm the problem, and then we start putting control measures in place. That's the typical way of doing it, what we call the reactive way. But the preventative way is before you have the problem, like I said, you walk your water system, you know where the problem might happen, and you put your control measure in place, and your surveillance is not only about the end quality of water, but that your control measure is working, that it is working and it's efficient. The water safety plan is a process of risk management. You start with mapping your water supply system. You identify hazards and risks. Then you review the adequacy of your control measures, the existing ones and the additional ones that you want. You prioritize and implement the most critical control measures. There's no point investing so much in small control measures that will not make a difference when the big control measures, the control measures that make the big difference are neglected. So you need to prioritize. And then review the water safety plan constantly. The water safety plan is a living concept. It's not something that you do at the beginning of the year, and then you get it approved, and then you just put it on your desk. It's something that is requires constant review and updating and actually implementation. But what we advise is that countries have to start with a vision. I mean, we have to start with a vision. And the vision is basically that we want water safe, right, for all. If we want to introduce water safety plans at the country level, it's a big task. It's not simple because it requires a lot of regulatory update. It would require a lot of capacity building. It would require a lot of procedural development in the country. It takes anything between 5 to 7 years to really have the system going, and so that every water supply system have a water safety plan. But what we say is start with a vision. Don't start without that vision. The vision is generally like we want to institutionalize the preventative drinking water safety management. This is one thing. And the other thing, so that every water supply system in the country has developed and implemented a water safety plan. This is the vision. Now, how to go about it? What we say to countries is like, start, think big, have the vision, and think big, have a roadmap, and then start implementing small, start implementing the building blocks, a block by a block. Scale up. Start small and scale up. There is a document that WHO developed for countries to guide them on how to introduce and scale up the application of water safety plan that you can have on WHO website. But in summary, the document looks, this is the outline of the document. It says we need to understand the water safety plans and the water safety management plans. We need to establish the preliminary vision for it, the national vision. And we need to attain practical experience before we go large and establish a strategy to scale up. So this strategy to scale up has to be established at the start. And then do some demonstration projects that will aim up at building capacity, establishing procedures, refining the procedures, et cetera, and then update your regulatory framework so that you pave the way for enforcing the requirement for water safety, and then implement water safety plans. Assign the responsibility to the utilities to develop their water safety plans, and you need to upgrade your sort of water surveillance scheme accordingly. And we have lots of resources for you if you wish to use them. We have the Water Safety Plans Manual. It's a step-by-step approach to how to go about developing the water safety plan. It's available in Arabic, in English, and in French, and in Farsi as well, but you don't use Farsi here. And we have the WSP portal, which is a collaborative effort between WHO, the International Water Association, to provide you with experience on how it is being done, the experience of different countries from around the world. And we have the document on the roadmap to supporting country-level introduction and scaling up of water safety plans. It's a step, it describes to you the key steps on how to start and how to scale up. And in addition to all of that, we have the Water Safety Planning Quality Assurance Tool, which is a tool, computerized tool that can assist you in evaluating your water safety plan, how far, how well, how effective it is. That's a computerized tool where you develop your water safety plan, you feed in some indicators from the water safety plan into the computerized tool, and then we'll give you feedback on how well is your water safety plan conceived and developed and implemented. And thanks, that's all my presentation.
Dr. Hamid, thank you very much for your valuable presentation, especially the things about the water safety plan. Probably will invite you again for questions.